This is BC Food and Wine Radio. Now, here's Anthony Gismondi.
Our guest today is Richard De Silva, vigneron proprietor of De Silva Vineyards. Richard's family's been farming in the Okanagan since the late 50s, and given all this talk about the deep freeze in January, I wanted to get it right from the horse's mouth, somebody who actually farms vines, and get an update on this story, which isn't a pretty picture at the moment, but we're going to find out what's going on. Richard, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me, Anthony. I'm glad to be back.
I just want to, there's so much hysteria out there. I just want to sort of get it straight about what's going on. And one of the things is it too early to assess the damage, or what are you hearing? What are you seeing? You know, what are your thoughts about what's happening in the Okanagan and the Similkameen?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much certain at this point from the analysis we've been doing in our own vineyards that we're going to have most likely virtually no crop this year. That can be assessed with fairly high degree of certainty with just techniques that we have available to us. I guess the wild card is what's the damage to the plants and plant physiology, and seeing if we're going to be able to have plants that will make it through, and or do we have to replant? That won't be able to be assessed until probably April or May.
Right. I got to jump around a bit, but is this? We're talking about grapes, but what about all the other cherries and peaches and stuff like that? Same sort of story, or? Oh,
absolutely. Yeah, we've I think on the Naramata bench, I've heard from a couple of prominent cherry growers that they're looking at maybe 20% of their crop here. Possibly less. I know up in the northern part of the Okanagan, they're looking at complete loss of crop from their assessments thus far. Specifically with soft fruits, like you said, like peaches and cherries, apples. I mean, this event will impact all tree fruits and vines in the valley, regardless of whether or not they're hybrid or vinifera or whatever, or tree fruits. It was that cold enough that it would do that damage to all these particular crops.
Yeah. You've been around forever. Your family's been farming forever. So is this a first-time event, or has it happened once before, or how would you describe what's happened this winter?
Yeah, I think for a lot of those that are specifically in the wine industry, probably the last 2 or 3 decades, they're certainly not familiar with this particular part of our history and what it means to be cold climate. I know the year that my family first landed in '56, there was a massive frost kill or winter kill. Then basically wiped out the whole BC fruit industry at that time. It happened again in the '60s, and then when in my particular thing, I was 7 or 8 years old, was in '78. There was another one of these, probably one of the last real bad ones. And then '85, and then since '85, there's been sporadic events, but not to the damage that we were seeing in the '60s, '70s, and even back to the '50s.
Yeah, a lot of chatter about what can be done. One thing that drives me crazy is that everybody's talking about hybrids. I get it. I know a bit about the modern hybrids that taste good, but tasting good is one thing, selling them is another. What do you make of all this rush to hybrid varieties and all this, like, right out of the gate?
Yeah, I think the one thing is with this event is that this event was, it wouldn't have mattered, what you were planted. It was that cold that it would have, hybrid or not, you would have been fairly impacted. I think the thing goes back. The issue with this is that we had vinifera vineyards planted in the '70s that survived through the '70s. So it comes down to a couple of things: proper sites. We had Chardonnay, Merlot, Chenin Blanc, a bunch of these varieties planted back in the late '70s that went through those fields in the late '70s and the early or the mid '80s. That survived just well, but most of that was due to the way we were growing. I think that's where the lack of experience is. There was a rush. in the mid-90s to go with all rootstock plants. For those that don't know, most plants are planted on a different kind of rootstock.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is that when you get a winter kill, you at least with a self-root, which means you just take it from the own cutting of your vine, which Washington State converted to a while back, or back when they had some harsh winter kills a number of years ago, is at least you're able to retrain the vine from the ground up.
Yeah, and save a lot of time.
Save 2 years. Yeah. So most of my own personal vineyards, about 90% of them are self-rooted. So for me, I'll lose this year, but assuming that, best case scenario, I could possibly have a partial crop next year. Whereas if you're on a self-root on rootstock and you're dead to the union of that graft, you potentially are looking at 3 years out. So that's the difference between those two systems.
Yeah. Our guest is Richard De Silva. He's a vineyard owner and proprietor of De Silva Vineyards. Richard, Ontario has had some oversized crops in the last couple of years, but for some reason we cannot, to use the worst term possible, import Ontario grapes when we need them in this kind of a crisis. What the hell's going on with Canadian wine? Like, it's Canada. They're in Canada. Is that not a possible solution?
Yeah, it's a very complicated topic, of course. It goes back to the way our industry was set up by the industry that was asked by the government to help create a framework. And so today, fast forward to today, we're left with one of the only countries in the wine world that have these silos of Ontario versus BC versus Nova Scotia. It's a framework it was a very self-serving, self-interest created system that's now coming back to bite us. And it's a very unfortunate situation. It's very much the way it is in Europe, as you know, and in Australia and other places, but in Canada, for some reason, the power players that created our industry created the system to protect a lot of self-interest, and now we're the industry has grown and has evolved. Yeah, we're still left with these skeletons in the closet that are from an antiquated system to this day.
Wow, it just seems to me that this is solvable. Obviously, we're talking about taxes and all the rest of it, but the fact is that if you open a shoe store, you can do anything you want in Canada. If you're selling grapes or wine, you can't do anything but be under the lock and key of the local monopoly or whoever it is that sets it all up. So maybe this will be
to be fair. Sorry, to be fair, I think a lot of people in our industry, we kind of look at some of the regulatory bodies to blame for this. But in fact, I think the industry needs to really look in the mirror. A lot of the initial players in this industry created the system we're in today, and the government and the regulatory bodies were looking from direction from the industry, and the industry took that as an advantage to create a system that at that time protected their own self-interest. And I have to call that out because I think it's important that we now learn from that. I think, again, there's a whole new generation of winery owners and winemakers here. The industry has evolved. It's flourished. We've gone past that. And I think it's now time to really, take an event like this has just happened to us as a lightning rod to modernize and bring our Canadian wine system in line with the rest of the real wine world. And I think that's where the golden opportunity lies here.
We're going to run out of time, but there's still a bit of time left. I want to do a couple of things. One, let's focus on De Silva now. How will you manage the next 2 or 3 years, and what are you going to do with inventories, all that sort of thing? And a lot of people are talking about Washington fruit, which I just think is a disaster if we go down that path. But what's your opinion about those two issues?
I mean, for myself, it's far be it from me to hinder someone from what they need to do to survive and feed their family. Farming is challenging at the best of times without me having to try to, inject my personal opinion on that. I am obviously going to be very much more for a Canadian solution as my preferred choice if I don't have grapes. And likewise, if our friends in Ontario have no grapes, in a winter event, I can turn around and sell them grapes. So I think there's a win solution there. But we've been here before. We know kind of what this looks like. It'll be very challenging for us, but I think it's an opportunity to showcase farming and resilience and really focus on how we can be resilient and come out of this stronger. I think the farmer in me is always optimistic, and De Silva, I still think the future, the reason I'm here is still the reason I'll be here next year is still bright. I think, nature gives us these curveballs. They do in every wine region in the world, and we're not immune from it.
Yeah. Well, you said something interesting to me earlier this week about your family, the 16 family members in Oliver that were farmers. And you said that...
Yeah, there's four grandparents and 12 aunts and uncles. And I always tell people as a story, I said, look, most of them died poor and broken. I think there's a misconception by many of our fellow Canadians that wine is this luxury product. And I think we forget that there's farmers behind this, like their hands, like my family is just trying to make a living. And there's a lot of great small producers that are doing that. And sometimes we get sidetracked by some of the more shiny, projects out there. But, keep in mind that the vast majority are small farmers employing a number of people here that it's their livelihood. And it's important that we respect that this is a livelihood for many people.
Mm. Well, Richard, I really appreciate you talking about this today. I mean, in many ways, when I say we, I mean consumers have been asked to do a lot for the BC wine industry. And I think that when you start talking about maybe the industry needs to look inside and make some big changes as well, that would be welcomed by all of us so that we could continue to support them and they could stick around for the next 100 years. Next week in Vancouver at the International Wine Festival in a couple of weeks, the Italians are going to be here. Many of them, not many, but lots, have multi-generational. Some are 26 generations. I'm sure they've seen everything you could ever imagine in the economy and in weather, and they're still around. So they'd be a good source to talk to for some people who maybe, need a bit of a lift.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's farming, regardless of where you are in the world, shows it has a common thread through it and a common denominator. And I think there's challenges and there's great rewards as well. And I think consumers and our people here, what they want to believe in is they're supporting and being part of that journey with all of us.
Yeah. Before I let you go, Richard, what about the restaurant? Will it be open for business this year?
Yes, we do have wine for sale. So yes, come on up and visit.
Okay.
There's a lot of wineries up there. They're going to have their tasting rooms open. We're going to be open. Our restaurant's open. So we're definitely looking forward to everyone coming up and visiting us this year.
Super. Richard, thanks so much for this overview. We'll get back to you as things develop so that we can, let our listeners know what's going on.
Absolutely. Anytime, Anthony. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. That was Richard De Silva. Of course, Richard is the vigneron and co-proprietor at De Silva Vineyards on the Naramata Bench.
That's it for today's show. This is BC Food and Wine Radio with Anthony Gismondi.